Welcome to Tell Me Your Story, new paradigms for a new world where we're giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here 9 times a week, Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., and Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m., streaming live at all those times at richarddugan.com. We are on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, as well as YouTube, where you can watch these conversations. I hope that you will take time to subscribe and click notifications so that when a new conversation is posted, you'll be notified and you'll be able to tune in, listen in, and learn, and be entertained and inspired. A reminder that Choices, which is my book, 5 Steps for Life, it's available on Amazon.com in paperback, hardcover, and Kindle with Audible, soon to be released. We also ask that if you can support the work that we are doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And when they ask for an email address to whom you're sending, please go to richard@richarddugan.com. That's the email address. If you go to richarddugan.com, there is also a link directly to PayPal so that you can send us whatever support you can. And we thank you to those who have helped and to those who will help. We also ask that you take time during this decade of perfect vision, the 2020s, to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. And with that, we now take you to our very special interview and guest here on Tell Me Your Story. Welcome to Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it is a great pleasure to have as our very special guest here on the program a gentleman who has written a book and shares his insights and so forth through his website and the work he does. The book is entitled Unlocking the Inner Strength. It has to do with going behind your negative emotions. And first of all, I want to thank a very special guest, Dr. Greg Stewart, for joining us here on the program. It's really a pleasure to have you here. And as our conversation takes place, we are maybe 12 hours out from the outcome of the 2024 election cycle. But thank you so much for being with us following that.
Yes, it's my pleasure, Richard. I look forward to the conversation. Yes, and there's a lot to discuss, and more about the emotions than actually the results. But
exactly. And to be clear to our listeners, we're not going to be talking about the politics of it all. That is not what this program is about. We've made that very clear, and of course I have as well, folks. You hear me say all the time that what I'm about to say I want to make as apolitical as is humanly possible, and I'm going to do the same thing here on this program today. One of the interesting things, and of course you've already alluded to the emotion. I know that a lot of folks have been very excited about the fact that finally, after listening to, and again, whether it's on the local or the national stage, we've been hearing from, and I'll put it this way, we've been hearing from them. And on Tuesday, the 5th, they got to hear from us for a change. Aside from the hecklers at the various rallies.
Right, of course, right.
And I know that we would all love to be able to sit down and talk with these individuals and say, what are you talking about? I don't get it. I don't understand, and so forth. Or wanting to share our perspective with them, saying, do you have any idea where I'm coming from and my life, and so on and so on and so forth. And then we have our say, and then the results are tallied, and we're either happy or we're not happy. And what I have found so interesting is, even in my own relationships, there are those who will use that phrase that I know you've heard many times. Greg, you make me feel. When in fact, that's not true. You don't make me feel anything. I choose. And I think that's where we might want to start, especially in terms of, and again, wherever you fall on the political spectrum, you're feeling something. the results didn't make you feel that way, did they? You made that choice.
Yes. All right. So in that process of, I have the book, of course, and I use the concept of, you know, walking into our negative emotions, because our negative emotions are telling a story, and not just a story like on the surface of I feel anxious or I feel anger or whatever. It it points to that there's a deeper story involved. So I say, like, emotions are on the surface, what we feel every day, but in the basement. And I use that phrase because I talk about, like, our emotions like a house. And we're standing on the front lawn and we're looking outward, and I'm looking at Richard and processing Richard, like, this is where Richard upset me. So I'm burning all of my emotional energy processing that. When I say we have to go turn around and walk first, there might be something Richard did, something legitimate, where it's like, hey, Richard, don't do that again. But I first have to go into the house and unpack my own negative emotions. Why? Because more often than not, like, Richard, your true offense on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 1. But why am I feeling a 6, 7, or an 8? And
Mm-hmm.
it's that inflation we have to deal with. And that's where the whole process is: unlock the inner strength behind negative emotions, because it's exposing something in me. And that's where the freedom is. And negative emotions aren't bad. Matter of fact, it tells us a huge story in our hearts of identity, value, and worth, or maybe previous trauma. And that's the key, where we need to unpack that first before we address on the outside of the house what's actually going on. And
Yeah.
it's not, so I'm almost like on a crusade of not just, helping client by client. I really believe in our culture on both sides, this emotionality has to stop. We're validating our beliefs and thoughts because of our emotions instead of vice versa. So I say emotions don't produce themselves. They come from sentences in our mind. The emotions are a direct product of those sentences. So the first thing we need to do is evaluate the sentences, whether or not they're true or not true, or rational, healthy, wise, and right. And I use that paradigm all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if we do that, if every one of us does that first and then challenges our own mental models, man, the emotional product will follow. And then we'll be more closely aligned to what is rational, as opposed to irrational, unhealthy, unwise, and wrong. So I think a huge piece of just healing in our country, regardless of the side, is we've got to do that walk into our house and unpack that. That's my focus.
I find it interesting that you are dealing with the inner life, the inner traumas, the inner struggles, the inner questions, everything that's on the inside of us. Someone shared with me in one of our programs many years ago that when you take a look, and we'll speak specifically to natural occurrences, hurricanes, earthquakes, wildfires, etc., they would say, take a look at those and then go inside and see where your inner hurricane or wildfire or earthquake or whatever is. Where's that turmoil inside of you? That's really what you're talking about too. And so when I saw the double whammy with Florida this season, just a few weeks back,
Yeah.
of hurricanes, not to mention Tornado Alley and the tornadoes that they've had, and of course we've had out here the various wildfires over the years. I mean, I've lived here in Santa Barbara for 18 years now, from Phoenix, Arizona. I felt like I went from the frying pan into the fire. But, I've been through, I don't know, 16 wildfires, and only been evacuated once, which was rather remarkable. But I had to kind of take a look at those events, whether they were man caused or not, didn't matter,
Right.
and ask, okay, what's what's burning inside of me, and no Tums. There is no amount of Tums that's going to put out that fire. Um, when you work with people, and I'm curious as to whether if you're able to work on sort of in group settings, or is this really more, you've got to do it on an individual basis in order for it to really, truly be effective. And then, of course, that person, kind of like the drop in the water in the still pond, the ripple effects, they go out and they have been changed, so to speak, or they have changed, I should say. And people recognize this, and they either say, "I don't want anything to do with it," or "Wow, what did you do? I'm curious as to what you did because I like your demeanor and so on and so forth. I would really like to be in the same state you're in, of calmness and peace and joy and so forth." And then that person then comes to you. Do you do group or is it strictly individual?
So currently I do individual therapy, but a lot of this theory, two things. Number one is I always say that it ran through the system of Greg because I had like in the last 10 years an immense experience of personal growth, right? So that's one. But secondly, is I was a director of a residential treatment center with troubled teens. Like 95% of the teens would come in inpatient and stay for 6 weeks to 6 months. And a lot of my trauma therapy and a lot of this came, it was refined through that process, which was all group based. So it can absolutely be done in groups, but the deeper dive into how it applies to me, yes, it's individually based. However, that was my goal of the book, is to give enough equipping. And I'm really big not just on theory, but I want to equip. This is how you do it.
Mm-hmm.
And equipped in that process of being able, because I had to say right here, and I have a PhD, but it's hard to like keep asking myself, why am I so emotional? Why am I so upset? And obviously my mental model wants to again go to Richard and how Richard upset me, but I've got to say, okay, I understand where Richard, but why am I so upset? That's not Richard's issue. The inflation is not your issue. It's mine. So I think individuals can do that because they can unpack it, because everything we do is trying to achieve an emotional goal. So I say we have micro emotional goals and macro. The micro is here in the moment, right? It's like unfulfilled expectations. Somebody cuts me off, or somebody says something, but then the macro emotional goals are always over here. And I think that's what has to do with the election, is the macro of quality of life. That quality of life as placed in standard of living, which we talk about the economy, quality of life when it comes to living our values, and the quality of life when it comes to fulfilling our destiny and all that sort of thing. All of those macro emotional goals, I think, are what people who, if you didn't quote unquote win last night, those macro goals are now being threatened. It's not about the micro emotional goals, except for the experience of just the election.
Mm-hmm.
It's those macro emotional goals of I don't like the results, so my macro emotional goals are threatened. And I think if the person realizes, okay, are my macro emotional goals truly in danger from last night's election? Because obviously 4 years ago, it was just the reverse. 4 years before that, the reverse. And it's always been like go back and forth that the results of the election, that's really what the threat is. And that's
Yeah.
what people are scared of. So it can certainly be done in a group, but people have to do that individual work for sure.
It also has to do with change. I mean, change is certainly a sort of a catalyst in that regard. I want to talk too about that in what you just said in regards to the challenges that you face dealing with people who don't want to take responsibility for their lives, because they continue to use the verbiage, the language, the words, "they did this to me," or "they make me feel blah, 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 blah." And I have done my best throughout my life, and it was really kind of hammered home when I worked for 15 years at a Christian radio station back in Phoenix in the 80s and early 90s. And I kept hearing how, if good things happen to you, that it was God. You can give God's responsible. But if bad things happen, it's the devil. And I'm going, what are you, a puppet on a string being manipulated by forces you don't understand? I don't believe that. It's not my belief that, and I turn to the creator and say, look, on judgment day, first of all, there's nothing you're going to send me wherever you're going to send me. Okay. I have no control over that. That's been done. Number two is, I didn't create myself. You created me. You put me here. You are omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent. You have known from the beginning of time, if we want to use that phrase, what was going to happen. Okay. Ergo, I'm not responsible. This is on you, creator, because you set this all up. But again, in the final analysis, hey, I'm at your mercy, that kind of thing. Do you find that, people have trouble doing that because they have, I guess, sort of bought into the message? Not so much what I just said about, if it's God, it's, if it's good, it's God. If it's bad, it's the devil. But them, they did this, and so
Yeah.
forth and so on. And that's sort of the message. Um, and without belaboring this point any further, in terms of the whole concept of victimhood, when this whole thing started back in 2015, June 15th, I will always remember that day. And I heard the message coming. I'm going, wait a minute. I played this game back in the early 80s when I went through my personal growth programs. I played the game of victimhood and I won, meaning I don't play that game anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
And here we are again. It's their fault that we are the way we are, when in the reality, we're here because of the choices that we've made.
Right. Okay. So what I explain in the book is there's a control column in our lives and a no control column, right? So what I have control over, which is my free will,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even if there's things I don't have control over, I have a choice of response to. So I asked myself the question early on, like when I was like complaining or whatever the case is, I would say, Greg, has there ever been anybody who has had it harder than you and yet was successful? And when it comes to our bad experiences, I always point to Viktor Frankl, who was a psychologist, right? And he was in the concentration camps and he wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, nobody can hold a candle to what he went through. And yet he said, the only thing that my captors don't have control over me is the power of response. And that's the key. So our situation can be horrible, but even in that, we find someone like, you cannot control my response, my attitude of what's happening. That's one. So it's that one flip of, in the control column, I have a choice of response. Number two is that taking ownership over what I do have control over. And then there is, in that realm alone, I don't think people realize how much power we have to improve, again, our micro and macro emotional goals. Even the micro, I talk about in the moment of insecurity, that if you tease me, I have complete power over whether or not I have an emotional response. To the macro emotional goal, that regardless of, I can increase my standard of living, I can live my values, I can have a destiny and a purpose. So I have control over that as well. And finally, what I see people doing is this, that I'll call it contingent. The sadness I see is that people make their emotional state or their emotional healing contingent upon the person who upset them either receiving justice or owning it.
Mm-hmm.
And right there, if my emotional happiness, state, joy, peace is contingent upon the person who hurt me receiving justice, I'm in big trouble for the rest of my life. Or, right, if I make my happiness or contingent upon you owning something, like apologizing, because people don't apologize, right?
Yeah.
So if it's contingent, that word contingency. So I try and equip people to remove, like, I don't need them to pursue me, validate me. I don't need them to receive justice. I want them to apologize. I want them to pursue me. I want them to validate me. I don't need them to. And right there's the key difference. My emotional peace, rest, present state happiness, or what have you, is not contingent. I don't need it. I want it, but I don't need it. And that's where I think right there is the linchpin where people get stuck.
Your book has an interesting mathematical equation. Now I may be putting this incorrectly,
Right.
but nonetheless, it's I cubed.
Exactly.
Okay?
Right.
I to the third power, if you will, and it has to do with information, interpretation, and then intensity.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about each one of those, starting with information. Now, the information we're talking about, if I am correct here, has to do with self, has to do with, as we started out the program, talking about the messages that we've received, that we've taken in, right? And and the problem I think that we have today in our hyper information age, and I use that term somewhat loosely because not everybody believes the same things. And they may only get their information, quote unquote, from very specific sources that support the messages that they have received over the years. And this was something that came to me just recently. I don't know why it didn't come to me 8 years ago. The phrase that has been often used by many, many people coming into this country, including people who were born and raised here, is this is the greatest country in the world, right? Now, how you define that is that's a whole nother question. And then in the last 9 years, we've been hearing that other phrase, make America great again. But you can't do both. You can't have it both ways. It can't be the greatest country in the world and that you're going to then make it great again. It's either great or it isn't. I mean, first of all, am I splitting hairs here? Am I playing semantics? Or do I have, and again, I'm not looking for.
I know exactly. It's not gonna get political, but your examples are, you nailed it as far as the examples, right? All right. So one is this IQ, and I was a math major in college. That's where that's the IQ comes
from. I like that. That's very good.
Right?
I like that.
Right. Uh-huh. So it's information, interpretation, intensity, but I liken it onto the Panama Canal. So there's locks, right? So the first lock has to fill up before the second lock opens.
Okay.
And the second lock and so on. The first lock is information. It's just data and facts. Right. And so I say, if I don't have all the information, if I don't have all the facts, I use the word illegal to make it, it's illegal for me to have any opinion, interpretation. And it is illegal for me to have any emotion, intensity until I have all the facts. Now, Richard, again, regardless of what side you're on, imagine how glorious it would be in our country if people applied that one simple rule. Yeah. It is illegal for me to have any opinion or any intensity unless I have all the information that's possible, right? But let's say information, because our interpretation is what you said. Like, what's my opinion about the facts? So once the first lock is filled up, interpretation simply is, let's say, negative, neutral, or positive. So when I have an opinion on something, is there any other way of looking at it? And that is where we learn from one another, that you have information in your mind and a way of thinking, the formulas that I don't have. So regardless of what side is, like, you see things the way I don't, and I want to learn from you.
Yeah.
Because my mental model, I've decided a long time ago, is messed up. I say it's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, right? So knowing that about my mental model, even with my degrees, I go into an aura of, you have information I don't have, and you have a way of thinking that I could learn from. Again, so we just apply those two locks, and my intensity as far as emotional energy will naturally follow. So let's say in the examples you used, that we're the greatest country, right? So that's an interpretation of the facts, but the facts and information are, well, what is it? How is America? What are the facts about America?
What's your criterion?
Right. And then what compared to the facts about every other country? So the interpretation is that we're the greatest country based upon all of the facts put together in comparison to all the other countries.
Yeah.
But so in one sense, well, we could still be the greatest country on the face of the earth, and then yet we could even be greater still. So both could be true. It's just, it means both are true. So make America great again. It's, well, we seem to, the opinion is we slip back in certain ways, which has consequences. But even at that state, we're still the greatest country. But yet we want to. So it's just how we interpret things. Is there any other way of thinking about it? That's exactly. applies.
And I'm a firm believer there's always room for improvement, no matter how good or great you are as an
Yes, sir.
individual, your invention, or the country. There's always room for improvement. I mean, that's why people remodel their houses, you know. They,
Yes.
I want to turn this giant living room into two rooms here. I want to study over here and so forth and so on. So hey, we do that. And it's a fascinating process to go through. And then even as an individual, for me, I've been going through personal growth and development processes, whether it be in a group setting back in the '80s with LifeSpring or Delta or Omega Vector in Phoenix, or just reading books. Or I've told this many times on this program, this is part of my therapy. You're
Yes, sir.
helping me, Dr. Greg. You're helping me to sift through the minutia and to get to the root of why I am feeling, I am choosing to feel. And that goes back to, again, my book, Choices, 5 Steps for Life, where I want to ask you about this aspect of words. One of the steps is match your words to your choice, whatever your choice is, doesn't matter what it is. So let's talk about that, especially in terms of information and in terms of those messages that we've taken within. Because you in your book, Unlocking the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions, we've just been talking about that. And I have said many times, words have power. Politicians, the religion, the clergy, educators, I don't care what occupation you're in, whatever the words you are using them for a reason. Because I was accused of being very naive during one of the campaigns in Arizona when I was still living there. And I said, no, wait a minute. He said that, but that's a moot point because that was 10, 15, 20 years ago. And yet he's bringing it up. Oh, Richard, come on. It's just politics. And I'd say, no, it's not. He's using those words for a purpose. He has an intent. So intent is, and it's not one of your eyes, but intent, when choosing the words that we use, to me is very important. You don't choose the words you choose just because it's in the dictionary, right?
Yeah. And so intent, I like differentiate like intent versus impact.
Ah,
So, right. So it's like, well, I didn't mean to, right. So I work very, very hard at not evaluating people's motives, like manipulative or genuine. I
mhm,
stay away from that as far as I can. But the
sure.
point is, what we need to realize is that because of their experts, then you can better evaluate their intent because of
Mhm,
their expertise. Like they know why they choose the words they choose, right?
right.
But the intent of, right, and that's why I say emotional goal. Both sides are trying to achieve an emotional goal, big picture, which is a standard of living, the life experience we have, right? So that's what we're trying to achieve. So they're trying to motivate people to say, hey, take this path to achieve that goal. And they'll
Right.
use certain words because those words will create emotional energy. And that emotional energy gets burned off via action. That's the whole point of the election process is the words I use will create emotional energy in you that's going to motivate you to act. And you're like, that's right. Here we go. Right. And then we vote. Right. So
Mhm,
that is exactly what. But where there's accountability
mhm,
is accuracy and truth, the impact of the emotional words and the intent behind them. So yeah, we can all choose very powerful words,
mhm.
but we have to run it through the grid of rational, healthy, wise, and right. And on both sides, of course, there are accusations that, oh my goodness, if they win this or if they win this, well,
Yeah.
hey, can we examine the truth, the rationality? Is it rational, healthy, wise, and right to say those words or use those words? You're achieving the goal of creating emotional energy,
Mhm,
but the impact, the unintended consequences is this. But is the point is, yeah, you might just simply have a micro goal of motivating them to vote, but do you realize the impact again on both sides
yeah.
of is there truth there?
Mhm.
Is there truth? And if there's not truth, then that's what we need to be held accountable for. And
And
that's what it comes down to.
yeah, and this is the process that unfortunately a lot of people across the board, I'm going to use that term, across the board, are not using. They are, because this person, the figurehead, I'm going to use that term, the figurehead is sharing this word, these words or those words, what have you, to create certain level of impact, um, because it's within the realms of their echo chamber. They just accept what they're being told. I'm going to use this term, this word now. They just accept it as gospel. When in fact, people will say, you'll ask them, what color is the sun? And many people will probably say yellow. But the fact is, I'm co-host of a program where we talk about astronomy, space, aviation, and weather. But the fact is, the sun is white. Now, some might say that because they can look, not looking at it, but look up and they can see, it is white, sure. But some people will say it's yellow because of the images that we see from outer space. For example, the telescope, the images when we see those solar flares and the mass coronal ejections and so forth. So I'm wondering if, when we talk about interpretation, how do we, and maybe this is a moot point, because interpretation is not how do we interpret what's being said. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about interpretation as to how I am seeing it and why am I seeing it that way. Right? Am I?
Yes. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Like, I mean,
the using the sun, you have a great example. So information, and the information you have, because you have scientific information that others don't have. So let's just say that the sun is white or the sun is yellow.
Mm-hmm.
The interpretation is, well, is there any other way of looking at it? Because I don't have all the information.
Right.
But the interpretation is kind of subjective and experiential, meaning, what's my opinion on the sun being yellow or white? Well, it's zero, because then we go to the intensity, like, well, what bad happens if I think it's yellow, or what good happens if I think it's white, or vice versa, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know we're just talking about just an example like that, but that's
Right.
exactly how we need to apply it when it comes to anything. First of all, on the information, I don't have information because of facts and data and all that, but challenging my mental model and way of thinking is like, look, there are so many ways to think about this, and here's the issue that people struggle with, is that there are so many of the most powerful truths in our lives exist in tension. Both are true. Like what I say is, like, let's say Democrat and Republican, they both have a philosophy of what life should be like in culture, right? But I always say there's always more than one goal. That's why we have our system. So is there a way to achieve both goals? The Democrats have a goal of, we want this. Let's say, care for the poor and the down and out. We need to help them. The Republicans are like, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. It's your own free will and responsibility. At their core, now it's gotten lost in a lot of other minor things, but I remember thinking about this, let's say 20, 30 years ago, when things were more about philosophy of what I just said. I saw a bumper sticker, Democrats serve the people, right? So it's caring for them, but how do we achieve both goals?
Yeah.
And that's a way to interpret it, and to achieve both. Wisdom is found in achieving both goals, because there's always more than one goal. There is nothing is that black and white. How do we achieve both goals? Because there's truth in caring for those who need help, and there's truth in personal accountability and responsibility. That's as parents, you want to find out where the truth is. Like, when we raise our kids, that's how we should raise our country.
Yeah.
Because I say in the book that grace and empathy, because I was a pastor in my former life for 15 years. So grace and empathy without truth and boundaries is enablement. Truth and boundaries without grace and empathy is toxic. And we have this, you've seen this, right? Sway in the culture of 30, 40 years ago, where there's so much truth and boundaries, there was toxic and people felt so bad. Yeah. Now we swung to the other side, where now it's all about grace and empathy. Don't make people feel bad, but now we're enabling unhealthy behaviors because of lack of truth and boundaries. Yeah. We have to achieve both goals. Right?
And there is a balance that is achievable.
Absolutely. So when we use, going back to what you said, is like the words we use, I'm trying to use words that we talk about the loss, the toxicity. Like if we don't have grace and empathy and care, it's toxic. Or if we use the other extreme of like without truth and boundaries, right? So look
Yeah.
at what bad happens when there's not truth and boundaries, how horrible the country's going to be if we don't have truth and boundaries. Well, look how horrible the country's going to be if we don't have grace and empathy.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, you're right. If that was only either extreme, that's why we have to achieve both. How do we
Yeah.
achieve both goals?
You know,
It's crucial.
what you make me think of is going back to the natural disasters example. Even though I know, and the beautiful thing about social media is when I go on there and I look at some of the videos, the short little videos, of people who are now initially they will near the end of the video they will talk about how, oh, this is a social experiment to see where the kindness is in the world, and what they're doing is they will go up and they will ask for help, and they'll say, hey, do you have a couple of dollars so I can get some water or take the bus or blah blah blah, and it's usually a very small, I'm 50 cents short of blah blah blah, and the first person who helps them, they turn it around and say, why did you help me? I said, well, because it's what you do. I mean, you help people and so forth. When someone's down and out, you help them. He says, okay, well, first of all, here's your contribution to me. Here, I want to give you, and they give them a stack of bills. It could be 1,000, could be 10,000, whatever it is, dollars. And the people are just like, no, 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 please take it. I want to show my appreciation for your kindness. And of course, and we're videoing it over here, so that other people will see that there is still kindness in the world.
Yes.
And the two phrases that came to mind were the story, when it comes to pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, about teach, you give a person a fish for, you feed them for a day,
Yep.
you teach them to fish, and they'll eat
Yep.
for a lifetime.
Exactly.
And then, of course, there's the biblical adage as well of, love your neighbors and take care of them. True religion is taking
Yep.
care of the widows and the orphans,
Yes.
and so forth. So there is a balance there. And, I tell you, those videos, they warm my heart because it says, okay, despite what we're seeing, and I believe these are minority views, minority examples of the strong arm of responsibility, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, in terms of that kind of thing that's being portrayed in the media, not out in the real world where you and I live. That we need to understand that a lot of times this is the case, that the ones who sometimes scream the loudest, that we get inundated with those messages that sometimes we take in, they're not speaking for the vast majority of people. It's the screaming loud, I have a bullhorn minority of people that are making all of this noise and trying to convince the majority to go their way. And there are those of us who we want to go our own way. I mean, there are people who check out. They go out into the wilderness. They get off the grid. They said, I've had enough. And I have a feeling, though, Dr. Stewart, that doing that is sort of ignoring this aspect of unlocking the inner strength behind your negative emotions. They say, I'm not going to deal with that. I'm going to get away from everybody. And again, that's their choice. When I've interviewed and I've used that example, I say, hey, if you want to get off the grid, that's your choice. Go for it. I mean, it's your life. You're responsible for it. But we weren't brought onto this planet, if you will, or born onto this planet to live solitary lives. Now I understand the whole monastic. I was born and raised Catholic, so I understand the whole monastic aspect.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it's a wonderful thing. There are times when I think all of those different cloisters around the world of various faiths who are praying, that's the glue that's sort of holding the world together, right? Through all times. Because if they stopped, I think that, everything would fall apart, even on a subatomic level, everything would just go to dust. We'd all go to dust without those prayers. And so I'm thankful for those prayers. But it's a fascinating unlocking the inner strength behind your negative emotions. That is our conversation with our special guest, Dr. Greg Stewart. His website is Becoming More. I love that, Becoming More, and I hope you folks will stay with us here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and it's such a pleasure to have Dr. Greg Stewart here on the program, talking about his work through becomingmore.com, as well as the book that he has written, Unlocking the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions, and dealing with I cubed, or the three I's of information, interpretation, and intensity. And it is this kind of a conversation, as I've said before, this is my therapy. I needed this the day after, as we are conversing. Um, Not because I was angry. I mean, there was a part of me that was a little. I was really looking forward to, like a lot of people, to an historic moment of the first female president of the United States, not having anything to do with politics, but more of an historical event. I mean, that would have been incredible. I know it'll happen, hopefully in our lifetime, but uh, it was more along the lines of what I had been hearing, quite honestly, from both sides. About, there was much less of it on one side about fear mongering in terms of what the other side is going to be bringing to the table if they get in.
Right.
Um, but it's like there was a part of me that was like, after the first go around 8 years ago, I was thinking, oh, good, we can all breathe now. And we were never able to exhale because it never ended. And there's a part of me that, for a lot of folks, feel the same way, that I can't exhale yet. I'm still waiting for the other two or three or four shoes to drop. But that goes back to what's going on inside of us. Um, this is a concern of mine, Doc. I don't know if you deal with folks who are dealing with um, life-threatening mental issues, especially in terms of self-harm. But I have to wonder about the suicide rate that could be coming, the increase, because of the feelings that people are having, the depression that they may be going through. And I'd like for you to address that and them and say, hey, it really isn't that bad. Life is still worth living, and that we should surround ourselves with a network of people, family, friends, coworkers, and communicate how we're feeling. Talk to us, if you would, about.
Yeah. So this definition I have of depression, which I deal with 6 emotions in the book, and I call those the emotional management, daily emotional management on micro emotional goals, which is here and now. So it's insecurity, anxiety, fear, worry, anger, and then depression. So my definition of depression, it's, you won't find this in the clinical books because it's more like what's actually experiential in nature as opposed to clinical, right? So my definition of depression is that the person is still very, very angry, but they've lost hope. There's your hopelessness that anything is going to change. But here's the key. More than that, they've lost grace towards themselves. Okay. And I came up with that last piece because logically I would ask, like at the residential treatment center, if somebody is depressed, why would they harm themselves? I mean, like, depression is, man, this stinks. And what's this? It's my situation, which I don't have control over. So why would that turn into self-harm if I'm depressed because my environment won't change? It's because their conclusion is that they say, I burned so much emotional energy trying to change the environment and it hasn't changed, hasn't budged an inch. So my only conclusion is it must be me. There must be something wrong with me. I'm worthless. So let's say the election, it for certainly is a overuse the word, but it is a trigger. It's an experience that creates the emotion, but the emotion is not just related to the election. It's about loss over their entire quality of life, that there's a bunch of other stories that led up to, in the election is just another one that here we go again.
Yeah.
That my joy, peace, happiness is contingent upon
Mhm.
this environmental piece. And when I try and impact the no control column, it's not moving or moving based upon expectations or my interpretation of it. It's not budging. So I must be terrible. I must suck. I must be worthless. And it's that piece that turns into depression. So two things. Number one is the working towards the removal of my emotional goal and my quality of life is not contingent upon anything in the environment. That I have the ability to respond and I have to keep burning energy and working at it. Now, the other piece as far as depression is that what's the worst that can happen? Now, I know there's theories out there about the worst that can happen, but again, what I like to say is, okay, let's fast forward a year or 2 years or 3 years or 4 years, because even the Republicans were saying the same thing, like, oh no, right? But
Mhm.
even on
Yeah.
the Republican side, looking back at the last 4 years, it's horrible. Well, I mean, is it? I mean, I'm looking around. I like my life. It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. I got two dogs here, right? So is it really that horrible? Because we are such resilient people. Just
Yeah.
again, Viktor Frankl,
Yeah.
don't don't sell yourself short on your own resiliency.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to like emotional intelligence or resiliency, I don't care what happens around me. Is there anybody who's had it worse? Viktor
Mhm.
Frankl. It's about resiliency. Like
Yeah.
it's like bring it, or the phrase of hold my beer, right? Watch this. It's about my response that I don't need anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have the ability to, and that's where I want people burning their emotional energy. Remove the environment. And that's the whole key. Remove the environment from your emotional state. You have to respond to it. So I say, start with the concept of, as far as emotional, nothing bothers me unless it should. Okay. So we start at zero, like nothing bothers me, but that's can be passive. But sometimes it should bother me. So no, I need to again address this with Richard. So it should bother me. So I burn emotional energy at the right level. But what do? Well, our impulse response is it bothers me. I'm at an 8. And now I have to work at pulling back the emotion. Instead of saying nothing bothers me, start at zero, unless it should. I control my emotional response.
Yeah.
And then the right amount of emotional energy to address situations. So keep fighting because you have a vision, you have values, quality of life. Keep fighting for your values, but have the right amount of emotional energy. That our emotional energy is there to burn, to execute a task. And our emotional energy should be burned off, period. And if it's not, that's what you have to walk into,
Mm.
because I should have so much emotional energy to burn in an action. And so if it's emotional energy that kind of sits there, because it's not just an action, like I have to keep working towards changing this. So I'm not worried about the government. At grassroots, I'm worried about the Richards.
Yeah.
I'm worried about my clients. I see about 40 clients a week. That is where I want to equip them, because that's where it's at.
Yeah.
Right. So I burn my emotional energy. Now we see the fruit of it in our environment, our culture,
Mhm.
but my emotional energy is not towards something I can't control. My emotional energy is in influencing long term what I
Yeah.
can, which is helping people gain autonomy and control, and also critical thinking,
Yeah.
because rational, healthy, wise, and right hovers above us all. So if I say to you that's not rational, you can't just say, well, I disagree. No, you've got to prove that it is rational. There's something powerful about those words.
Yeah.
So on depression, it's burn your energy in what you have control over and in your interpretation, saying, I don't need my parents to validate me or apologize to me, or I don't need my ex spouse to, be rational or say, hey, I hurt you. I want it. I
Yeah.
don't need it. So I'm going to burn my emotional energy on increasing my quality of life. So that takes away the depression, because anger, when it says you're still very angry, when it comes to anger, there's all this emotional energy to change the environment, but it's inflated. But you have to ask your question, what am I afraid of? So go through the whole process of how to basically decrease your emotional energy,
Mhm.
because that inflation is related to lies you believe, or identity of any worth or trauma. And then secondly is to burn emotional energy in the right area, equipping yourself. That's honestly big picture is the answer.
We are talking with Dr. Greg Stewart. He is the author of a fascinating book that is, I think, something you're going to want to get a copy of. I hope you'll pick up a copy of the book, Unlocking the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions. And where he talks about these three I's, I cubed, if you will, information, interpretation, and intensity. And we hope that you will continue to listen as we continue talking here on Tell Me Your Story. I'm Richard Dugan, your host, and we're talking with Dr. Greg Stewart. And Dr. Stewart, I have a question in regards to your study. Now, I have been producing programs, and my current boss, and I have done a calculation for the 45 years that I've been in this business that I've probably produced, as well as maybe hosted some of these, some 50 to 60,000 programs. From religious programs back in Phoenix for 15 years to different radio stations and so forth. And one of the things that I jokingly talk about is how I should have a PhD in eclectic studies. However, it'll never be, I'll never get the document because
right.
But you are in the process of getting your PhD in a study that I had never heard of before. And I would love for you to share with us, what is systematic theology?
So I'll just tell you like a little background. So when I got my bachelor's degree in organizational leadership, and that turned into my coaching and consulting career. But I wanted to get onto my seminary because I wanted to be a pastor. So here's my first semester of seminary, my Master of Divinity. I took philosophy of counseling. And then that class was like a defining moment. It opened my eyes to, oh my goodness, this information is powerful. So I immediately mapped out a dual master's, a Master of Divinity, and then a Master of Arts in Counseling. But my dream has always been to get a PhD in both. So just through circumstances and stuff, I ended up getting my PhD, but I did my dissertation on the relationship of emotional intelligence with job satisfaction, organizational commitment, which is the organizational development stuff. But my long-term dream was to always get a PhD in theology. So when my son actually is attending seminary now, so I took that as an opportunity to sign up. Long story short, so I'm taking it, but I put a pause on that degree. It's still, I want to get it because of life events. My father passed away and stuff. And so I put a pause on that. But my long-term goal is to get it. Now, systematic theology is basically, it takes topics from the Bible, right? And theology is the study of God, right? Any ology is the study of, right? So theos, which is God in the Greek, ology. So systematic theology is taking every topic, like there's Christology, the study of Christ, pneumatology, the study of. So it's all the studies of all the ologies, and say, okay, what does the Bible say about prayer? What does the Bible say about sin? What does the Bible say about salvation? And so it just takes like all of the topics and does an exhaustive study of all of the what the Bible says about that particular topic. That's systematic theology.
Okay. I'm going to throw something into the mix to see if I fall into that category as far as at least the thinking in that context. What does the Bible say about perfection? In the New Testament, Jesus says, be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. And I pondered that for a long time. And then I remembered, of course, reading in the Old Testament where, God is speaking. It's funny how Jesus' words are in red in the New Testament, but God's words are still in the black and white in the Old Testament. It's like, wait a minute. Anyway, where God is quoted as saying, I am that I am. Be ye perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. Now that perfection, and I even went to my Strong's Concordance, doesn't say anything about good or evil, right or wrong. It, I think, talks about that which is in the Old Testament. I am that I am. So to be perfect is just to be who you are, to be a child of God, if you will, however you wish to interpret that, child of the creator, whatever other name, and so forth and so on. And I mean, and that just rings true for me. Whereas when I was working for the Christian radio station and I would ask these, we'll call them theological questions, in some instance, I would be told, well, you need to read the writings of the founding fathers of the faith. And I'm going, oh, wait a minute, who set them up as the founders? Number one. And number two, some of them I'd never heard of. And I would say, well, wait a minute, I've never heard of these people. And yet here I am in the 21st or 20th century, I'm asking these questions. So does that put me up at the same level as them? Because they were asking the same questions, without being egotistical. Don't get me wrong, staying humble.
I get it.
And grateful. But the answers that I would get just did not make any sense to me. And so I still ask those questions. And the one thing I love about getting the answers when I do get them is that they raise more questions. But here's the position that I come from. Yep. That is this, that I was shared with this when I was 21, feeling a little bit full of myself. Begin in doubt and end in certainty instead of beginning in certainty and ending in doubt. So is my systematic theological perspective on perfection, is it kind of close to kind of what you're doing in your PhD?
Yeah. So yeah, you're exactly right in the sense of, so first I want to go back to your, you don't have a PhD. I have said for literally decades now that there's people walking around all over the place who don't have a PhD, but based upon their knowledge, information, and wisdom application of, they are at PhD level, right? It just hasn't been formalized. So there's informal education and formal. So you might not have gone through the formal education process, but based upon your knowledge of application of critical thinking through, you're at a scholarly level in a particular or any topic, right? So that's one. So Dr. Dugan, right? Right?
Yes.
Right. So that's one. Secondly is the one thing that's common, and you already experienced this, that the more I learned, the more I went to school, the more I realized I didn't know. Right? Absolutely. The more, and that's where it's the more I realized I didn't know, because both in information as well as formulas for thinking, and that's the premise of one of my, it's a foundational piece of my book. You have to recognize that gap. You're blind in areas and so on. So it's an attitude. Like, matter of fact, I use Proverbs 2 in the book of, there's people who are like, hey, I know I'm wrong sometimes, right? Then there's people who are like, hey, I know I have blind areas. And people say, yeah, I'm open when people disagree with me, that are they right? But then there are people who are obsessed with, in Proverbs 2, it talks about, if you cry aloud for wisdom, if you search for it like it's hidden treasure, those are the people who grow, because it's this obsession with, I don't get it. I'm always under the assumption, always, I don't get it, right? Some acts I'm very confident, but because I've done my PhD work, again, just even in research, but it's this understanding that I am on a mission to eradicate my blind area, right? So when it comes to this topic of be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, related to I am. So what is I am? That I am has a state of, this is being, this is identity, this is image. And what it means is be perfect is both objective, subjective. So subjectively, I am, meaning that the way God created me, that is perfect, right? Because of my attributes and traits. Now, there's other, like there's DNA, life experiences, and choices. It's my choices that mess it up. So he's trying to say, when you make a mistake and screw up and you don't do rational, healthy, wise, and right, come back to who you are, which also relates to objective. Be perfect as your heavenly Father's perfect. Because any rule in the Bible, it's not about the rule itself. I know people get hung up on certain rules or certain commandments, or this is wrong. It's about the character of God behind the rule. If he created us, he is perfect. So if you want the maximization of love, of peace, all those good attributes like the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, then we have to imitate him in all of our choices. So when we don't, he says, come back to and figure out why you chose that path instead of the path I wanted you to. And it's in that process of the why, not just in I sinned or didn't sin or failed. It's the why. It's the pathway I choose to achieve the emotional goal. That is where you find out presence. Now, I just looked it up and I thought it was the right word. So the word is actually teleos in the Greek. Teleos. I would not say perfect. I'm okay with it, obviously, because it can mean that.
Yeah.
It's actually a word complete. Right. So in Colossians 1:28, which is my life verse for counseling, Christ we preach. I'm a Christian too. So Christ we preach, warning every man, teaching every man in all wisdom. All wisdom. Why? That we may present every man perfect, or how about complete in Christ Jesus, right? The completion has to do with God has a wonderful plan for our life, but it's through the process, again, that everything in that book I ran through my system. Like I went through a divorce. I was a marriage counselor and I was a pastor, and yet I had an emotional affair. I began the opening chapter and I had to figure out how or why, Greg. And so it's not about, yes, having that connection relationally with a female was wrong, right? But why did I choose that path?
Right.
And that's what I had to unpack. So completeness is not just about obedience to rules. Completeness is an understanding of who I am subjectively, what goals I'm trying to achieve because God gave me that freedom, but also comparing it objectively to perfection and molding myself. That's why prayer is, obviously we can get into theology of that it changes things, but I think another major reason for prayer is when I pray, I'm getting a different interpretation on my experience.
Yeah.
So it's objective. God, how do you think about this? You're perfect and you get it. So prayer is not just about like, I want to change something. Prayer is also about getting an objective opinion that I don't have because I'm subjective, which is I cubed on this. Like I don't have all the information. God does. He knows why. And the other piece, like you said, is all the attributes, omniscient, omnipresent. People don't struggle with God being all powerful. What they struggle with is being all powerful and not intervening. Right. Yeah. Then it comes back to, okay, so it's not really about the question of being all powerful. The question is he good?
Yeah.
So instead of saying, why didn't you intervene? Well, and then concluding there must be a flaw in his character. The real thing is, why don't you begin with, you have to make a decision on whether or not he's good. So if he's good, and because, not if he's good, but because he's good, then there must be another explanation besides the one I'm ticked off about.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So if he's good, so I'm going to God saying, hey, I don't see something here. Help me. Yeah. And it's through that process that he's trying to make us complete, perfect, teleos via I am.
And that's what we are trying to do as individuals through the work that you are doing and the book that you have just released, having to do with unlocking that aspect within ourselves of understanding more of why we are the way we are, unlocking the inner strength behind your negative emotions. There's one other area I would love, and we don't have to go into this right now, but it's often struck me that in the New Testament, there are countless examples of Jesus' emotions. And by the way, do you notice that I didn't say Jesus's? Because it's grammatically incorrect.
Right, exactly.
It ends with an S, so you don't put it
on there. S apostrophe, exactly.
Correct, thank you.
Yep.
But it shares with us many of his emotions. He was angry, i.e. in the temple. He was compassionate, certainly, to healing and raising the dead and so forth, to Mary Magdalene. He cried in the desert and so on and so forth. What's missing from my perspective, and I would say, so what does the Bible say about Jesus' happiness? Was Jesus ever happy? Did he ever laugh? Did he have any joy in his life amongst the people he was there to serve, that he did serve? And like I said, we don't need to go into it now, but that has always perplexed me. especially when talking about the um, the preamble to the Constitution, "We the people,"
Yep.
and the inalienable rights, and then of course the pursuit of
Yep.
happiness. And I've
Hmm.
often asked, um, do you think, and I'll ask you, Dr. Greg Stewart, do you think that the founding fathers had some kind of insight or maybe wisdom, if we want to use that word, in terms of putting that in there along with life and liberty?
Yes. So I'll bullet point this. So number one is Jesus had emotions that were negative. That's why they're not bad. Anger. Number two is in his pursuit of differentiating between happiness and joy. Happiness is in the experience of what is happening. The root word of happiness is hap, which is what's happening, which is very different than joy and peace, which is a understanding of the no control column and his heavenly father who had control over the no control column. So was he happy? Sure. Like there's a show called The Chosen that's out that does a phenomenal job of
Beautiful.
walking through that, right? So of course he was
Beautiful.
happy. He was human, right? So we say 100% human, 100% God. So he laughed, he cried, he was upset, right? So, but then it's about he was trying to teach us more about joy and peace,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then yes, on happiness, like why, like Mary, you are worried and I'm sorry, Martha, you are worried and troubled about many things, anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
So you have your what's based on what's happening, your emotion is inflated. So it's okay to work and serve, Martha, but you're troubled. That's the happiness piece. Versus in a joy and peace thing that regardless of what's happening, your heavenly father is in control and he is good. So there's a semantics thing. So when I think that the founding fathers, they merge the two. So that's a debate over what's happiness, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That it's the pursuit of happiness as it's related to, again, quality of life. Standard of living is happiness. I want to experience a nice house. I want to go on vacation. I want good food. I want a TV. I want the internet. I want air conditioning. That is certainly happiness based on what's happening. That standard of living. Pursue that. Increase your standard of living. Here's how you do it. But also, happiness is correlated with joy and peace, but live your values. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, body, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Live your values. You'll find peace there. But also, pursuit of happiness is in destiny. That Howard Schultz, had a vision of creating an experience.
Mm-hmm.
So his life was, all entrepreneurs have a vision of how they want to make people's lives better by either enhancing their experience or solving a problem. That's the pursuit of happiness. It contains all three. It's not just one thing. Standard of living for sure, but also living your values, but also living your destiny.
That's fascinating. I love this. This is a great conversation, and I'm hoping that people have tapped into it to glean some things from it, the wisdom and so forth. Hopefully, there's a little entertainment value as well as
Yeah, exactly.
um, I'm fascinated by all of these different aspects. I too am a reverend through the Universal Whole Life Church. It's an online thing. I completely forgot about it for 10 years until I got an email saying, "Congratulations on your 10th anniversary." I'm going,
Right.
yeah,
Oh, yeah.
because
Oh,
I
yeah. I
go,
can marry people.
yeah, exactly. Well, I haven't done that, let alone dispatched anyone, but nonetheless, it is there. And I have always been curious about these things. I mean, even growing up as a kid, I thought that maybe I'll be a priest when I grow up. I'll go down that path because I've always been curious about these kinds of questions, especially from a spiritual perspective, and at the same time trying to equate them or so to speak, translate or interpret them into the physical world. And I've never ever blamed or accused God of not doing or doing what have you. As a matter of fact, the question has been put to me many times. Well, but all the stuff that's going on, why doesn't God step in? I said, because it's not his job. That's not what he does. He leaves it up to us to take care of each other.
It
Because,
does not override free will.
yeah, if he had intended for us, as I mentioned earlier, to live solitary lives, and I use this analogy, science And astronomy has proven that there are enough Class M planets in the universe that you and I would be on separate planets. What's the reality? The reality is we're all here together. That tells me that we're supposed to learn how to live together, work together, play together, love together. And regardless of what's going on, whether it be an election or whatever the case might be, that hasn't changed. That has not changed. And I will say, and I forget what year it was, but it goes back to the late 20th century. I still remember, and because you brought this up about prayer, Pat Robertson got his group of we'll call them prayer warriors on his television program to pray that God would, quote unquote, move this particular hurricane that was headed their way. Well, I don't know whether God intervened or not. All I know is it moved. It did not hit that area. Now, again, if you are, of the belief that the prayer was what did it, I'm not going to argue with you on it because I'm not going to argue belief because that's a futile discussion. The reality is it happened. Okay. And whichever way it happened, thank goodness it did because, you folks were saved. And it's a shame that we weren't able to do that with those two hurricanes that went across Florida. But again, that's where you talked earlier about our adversity, our resilience, our adaptability to what happens in our world. Just like here in California, when the wildfires came, the one in particular where we were evacuated. And I have to tell you that when we were evacuating, I was a little concerned. I was a little stressed. But once we got off the mountain with all of our belongings, our animals, it was like a staycation for me. I mean, my wife and I were still both working, but we stayed in a hotel for a few nights, and then in another one. And then a friend of ours allowed us to stay at he and his wife's place for a couple, 3 days before we were allowed to go home. And it was like, this is kind of fun. And I don't want to do this all the time for these reasons, but I looked at it more as a wonderful experience of not only getting to know these people we were staying with, but also just the experience of being out and about, away from home. Again, the staycation concept. So it was fascinating. But again, it's that adaptability that we need to progress. Unlocking the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions. That is the title of the book. And our guest is Dr. Greg Stewart. His website is becomingmore.com. I absolutely love that website title. It's that's what we're all looking for, is to become more than what we are. And that I think that if I'm understanding from this conversation you and I have had, it's not that at this very moment we aren't enough. But as we said earlier in the program, there's always room for improvement. But it's each one of ours choice as to how we improve and what we do. And I also want to let you know that many, many of my guests have had their pets on the program, as your dog is right behind you.
Right.
And I think honestly, it's wonderful. We had at one time 9 cats and 3 dogs. We're down to 1, but I've never had a problem with that. I get guests who say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." No. They want to be a part of what's going on, and I think it's fantastic. And I thank you so much for being a part of what we're doing here on Tell Me Your Story.
Thank you so much, sir. And I would say that on my book, it's actually officially coming out November 19th. But just search for my name, because it's sometimes hard to find the iCube. Just search for Dr. Greg Stewart on Amazon. And it's available. Well, thank you so much. Yeah.
Now we're going to be linked to becomingmore.com, both on the podcast and the video cast, so people can click on that and go there. And I do have 3 final questions I do want to ask. Sir. Before I do, though, I want to thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World, where we are giving you choices and knowledge of those choices to help make your dreams come true. We are here on Sundays at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., Monday mornings at 1 a.m., Wednesdays at 9 a.m., And then Monday through Friday from 8 to 9 a.m. And we stream live at those times at richarddugan.com. We podcast on SoundCloud, iTunes, TuneIn Radio, Spotify, Stitcher, Player FM, Blueberry, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. We're on YouTube where you can watch these conversations. I hope you'll subscribe and click notification so that when I post a new conversation, you will be notified that a new conversation is available. Choices, 5 Steps for Life, is also available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle, with Audible soon to come. And we also hope that you will take time to go within to that quiet, peaceful, calm, still place and listen to that still, small voice. You want some real serious, one-on-one, personalized, only for you information and guidance and inspiration? Well, that's where you go. Dr. Stewart, I used to think if I could just find that one place on the planet where I could go to get away from everybody, would be terrific. And then I realized that if I could find it, so could they. Until I realized, oh, there is a place, and it's inside.
Right.
So we encourage everybody to do that. We also ask that if you can support the work we're doing financially, we do have a PayPal account. It is there for your security as well as ours. And we ask that you put in the email address of richard@richarddugan.com. That's who you're going to send it to. We have a link on the homepage of richarddugan.com for both the PayPal account as well as the book choices. So we hope that you will go there as well. With all of that being said, we ask of our very special guest here on the program these 3 final questions. And the first of those is, who is Greg Stewart?
Greg Stewart is a counselor, coach, adjunct professor, an author, husband, and father of 7 children between me and my wife. And I am a Christian, and I want to leave this world better than when I entered into it.
What was your best day?
My best day, I would say, because I'm a Christian, is the day that I, accepted Christ as my savior. And again, not in a religious sense, but experiential day. And the reason why is because I came out of, as a teenager, I did the party hardy teen years and then suffered the consequences from those years. And when I turned my life over to the Lord, it was a propulsion into purity, which I needed to have. But secondly, it was a peace because I could finally let go of all those hurts, regrets, and sins and be free from it. That was my best day.
And finally, let's see if I remember let's see here. What gets you up in the morning?
Helping people.
Once again, Dr. Greg Stewart, thank you so much for joining us here on the program and sharing with us the upcoming book, Unlocking the Inner Strength Behind Your Negative Emotions. We look forward to maybe having another conversation down the road. It'd be a lot of fun.
All right. Thank you, Richard.
And I thank you for listening to and watching Tell Me Your Story, New Paradigms for a New World. And until our next broadcast, podcast, videocast, love to love. Jeanette, I am still listening. Dad, continue to be happy because I am. Smokey, I'll see you on the other side. And to my dear friend Zorro, aho, aho.